All right, so I'm going to give y'all a bit of an update today on what we've been doing with our Dairy Business Innovation Initiative. And that's a little bit of what Dana Cole mentioned earlier. We are one of 3 areas that actually received this grant, thanks to the fearless leadership of Mr. Hal Pepper standing in the back row. Give us a wave, Hal. Then he handed it over to poor, much worse hands, which is me. So now you're stuck with me for the next forever. So yeah, that face, Milton. So we're going to give you an update of what we've been able to do with this program, where we see ourselves going forward over the next 3 years, because we just received another grant in this series. We're also going to talk a little bit about upcoming programs for the rest of the year. And then I'm going to hand it over to my work better half, Dr. Charlie Martinez, to talk about Dairy Gauge. All right, so this whole process started back in 2019. And the focus of this Dairy Business Innovation Initiative is to try to help dairy businesses at first in Tennessee, then Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina. And this next round is going to expand it to the entire Southeast. Now, with this grant call, there is definitely a focus on value-added dairy operations, but we want to make sure there is as much impact across all of our stakeholders as we can figure out how to do. So what we've done so far is field audits in Tennessee. We've done 22 so far, and that is current and potential value-added dairy processors. So for all of you in this room that have done it with us, thank you. If you're thinking about doing value-added, please give us a call. We'd love to talk to you about it and get out there and chat with you about your operation. And if you haven't done it with us yet, shame on you, and why haven't you called me? We've also done several educational sessions. So things related to economics, things related to different processing opportunities, and also things involved with dairy cattle health, food safety. So we've done a ton of things about that. We had our value-added dairy processing workshops that, again, at the beginning were just for Tennessee. We've expanded those across the tri-state area. We've also done a couple product innovation projects. We've done one looking at cheese crisps. We've done one looking at drinkable yogurt, and we're looking for a third person to do one with us next year. So if any of you do value-added, you know who you are. Please contact us if you want to do something with product innovation. We partner with our food science department and their capstone project class. So they will work with you on a product you want to create. They'll make a nutrition label for you. They'll do some sensory panel testing and get those results back to you on that project. So it's a pretty cool deal. We're still working on determining and documenting the value of sales increases or percent change. See, it does it to me too. And customer count for our Tennessee value-added producers. And one of the biggest things that we were able to do was provide a competitive sub-award program. And we ran this back in 2020. Is that when we opened it, Hal? For our Tennessee only producers, and ended up running 2 different rounds of that. And we had 227,000 total to award. So part of what we've found so far, and again, I apologize that it's small. One of my grad students, Caitlin Zaring, is working with us on helping understand what our population of value-added processors looks like in Tennessee. And what we'll see as far as like the differences, we have some larger herds that are actually involved in value-added in Tennessee. So our average herd size is around 460 for those that are currently processing, and around 130 for those that are thinking about it. We see that same thing as far as, well, you know, young stock and males, you know, and we have a pretty high percentage of our dairy farms that are actually using all of their cows for value-added production. Those that are thinking about it, we've actually got a smaller percentage that are wanting to do about 50%. So starting off with half their cows, adding more as they go. We do see that we're pretty similar with somatic cell count. That's definitely not statistically different. So below 300,000 for all of our herds. And we have a little bit lower production for those that are thinking about getting into value added than those that are. Our current producers average around 62 pounds per cow per day. Our potential are around 48 pounds per cow per day. And then our rolling herd averages reflect that difference in overall production. So we see there are some differences between those existing processors that have been doing this for a while and those that are thinking about getting into the game. But we definitely have a diverse population between those that are doing it and those that are thinking about it. Another thing we ask them is, what kind of products are you wanting to do? What kind of processing do you want to look at? So this is our current processors. So green means go, they're already doing it. Yellow means I'm thinking about it. And red means absolutely not, I'll never, ever, ever do that. So you can see most of our producers are thinking about creamline milk or ice cream. That seems to be the area that most of our processors are currently investing in. We do have a few that are doing soft cheese, a couple that are doing aged cheese, some with homogenized milk, some with butter, some with cream, and other products would be different lines of flavored milks, would be those other products. But the majority of our producers are doing cream line and ice cream. Seems to be the main things that we're doing right now, with a lot of interest in doing more cheese. So aged cheese, soft cheeses, and maybe getting into some of that other bottled. For our potential processors, we have a lot more diversity. So a lot of our processors, when we talk to them, our potentials, we ask them, well, what do you want to do? And they go, I don't know, whatever's going to make me money. So we have a lot of potential for what we're going to invest in the future, which is where we come in and suggest something like a feasibility study. And we've been able to fund several of those through our grant programs. So we have a good handle on what will work well in your area for your herd and for your management style. But we see a very similar trend: aged cheeses, creamline milk, ice cream, and butter. So since we've seen such an interest in creamline milk, we did ask a question about that we haven't finished analyzing on our consumer survey, and I'll talk about that on our next one. But see a lot of interest in things that we're thinking about doing, and not a whole lot of interest in some other things. So no one really wants to do lotions and soaps. Don't know why, current or potential, no one wants to do those. And not a whole lot of interest in yogurt or cream by itself. With our competitive grant program, we actually received 22 applications and were able to fund 11, so a 50% funding rate. And for those, we had 3 that went to feasibility studies. So I'm thinking about doing this. How's the best way to do it? 1 that went to exploratory product testing. So I have an idea about a new product I want to run, but I'm not sure how well it's going to go. And around, it was 7, but one of them was split between processing equipment purchases and employee training and ownership. And for our processing equipment purchases, we have producers that are investing in cheese molds. We have producers that are investing in cheese processing equipment, so slicers, shredders, packaging, or things like pasteurizers and other bulk tanks. So the main thing with this grant program is it has to be post bulk tank on the farm. We can't pay for any kind of actual infrastructure changes on the farm. So I can't pay for a parlor, I can't pay for building a building, but I can pay for some of the equipment that goes into the building. And I found out new information. Now I can pay for the sanitary panels that are needed in the building. I didn't know that I could do last grant round. So we get to amend that and pay for a few more things on this next round of funding, which I am excited about. But physical structures are something that we can't do. But anything with processing post bulk tank that doesn't have to do directly with the process of milking the cows, so not the dairy farm, the dairy processing plant, there's a pretty decent amount of wiggle room there. So for our phase 2, which started in 2020, what we really focused on was expanding our efforts that we'd started in Tennessee to some of our neighboring states. So we pulled in North Carolina and we pulled in Kentucky and started expanding our programs there. And one of the big things that we focused on was economics. So we worked really hard on dairy gauge. How many of y'all have done dairy gauge? If you don't mind me asking. I'm not going to ask, look at your numbers. See 1. Anybody else? Just 1 person's done dairy gauge? Really? The whole room?
You've done it, young.
Yeah. You didn't raise your hand. Oh, well, how many of you have done the dairy gauge program? Raise your hand. Oh, well, my numbers doubled, so that's good. There were more of them before everybody left. So dairy gauge, if you haven't done it, I won't steal all of Charlie's thunder, but he'll talk about it here in a minute. It's a way to really dial in on your cost of production. So it's not a good, it's not a bad, it's helping you figure out where you are and then using that to benchmark against other states and benchmark against some of the other data that we have from places like New York or Wisconsin. So there are other areas of the country that have these big databases, these big benchmarking things, but we don't really have one that's specific to the Southeast. So capturing this data, working with y'all to get more information helps us answer more of those questions like what we had earlier in the meeting today. It really helps us figure out where we are and kind of the roadmap for where we need to get where we're going. We've also done quite a few surveys or we will do quite a few surveys with consumer desires and willingness to pay for farmstead products. Again, this one is focused very heavily on farmstead. So it's made on the farm where it's produced. It's not really local in the terms of local labeling. We've done some of that before. There's potential we could do some of that again with this study as an additional question. But we have done one in Tennessee focused solely on milk. We plan to do some on ice cream and some on cheese production to try to figure out what those traits are that our consumers want. And the last one that we're working on here is an investment decision tool, looking specifically at bottling facilities. So all the equipment that you would need, some general costs, some general ideas for estimates of building and labor. And my student Caitlin is working on that as well. And hopefully we'll have that to roll out here before the summer. The other thing we've done is a value-added dairy conference. So we started that last year for the tri-state area, and that was held in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I think a couple of y'all came, but that was really focused again on value-added, trying to bring in speakers focused on that from across the country. We had Ann Wilkinson, who came in and talked about feasibility studies. We had Sarah Cornelis, I always say her name wrong, who came in and talked about marketing trends, what people are looking for in farmstead products. And then some of our food safety and regulatory friends from KDA talked about what their regulatory looked like, what their food safety looked like, and things to make sure you did. And our TDA guys were there too, and they answered a few questions on the fly. We appreciate. We're also working on describing the current state of value-added dairy processors. So more thing that we did here in Tennessee, trying to see that complete picture, Kentucky, North Carolina as well. We are working on market-ready curriculum. This is a program that University of Kentucky has put together. So this curriculum, it's going to be more of a train-the-trainer program. We're going to put it together, use it with our county agents, use it with their county agents, and get it all out to you as well, focused on value-added dairy. We're going to have an on-farm retail publication, and we're adding some state-specific regulatory models to Penn State's online curriculum focused on value-added dairy. So you can take this course, you can get certified from Penn State, and there will be a module that's specific for Tennessee regulations. What do you need to know for Tennessee? What do you need to know for Kentucky? And what do you need to know for North Carolina? So some of the results that we've gotten so far from our consumer preference survey, we had 817 respondents on a Qualtrics panel from Tennessee alone. And what they told us is they spent an average of $10, roughly $10.70 on dairy products a week. And that related to roughly 8.5% of their food budget. That's what they were currently spending on that. They were more likely to purchase, again, this is farmstead, this isn't just something with a local label. So this is making sure they're purchasing something that is like a Flowers product or a Turner product or a Sweetwater Valley product, something that's very specific to a farmstead label. They were more likely to purchase it if they were part of a larger household, which goes hand in hand with if they had children. So if it wasn't just a single person or a couple, they were more likely to purchase these farmstead products. They were also more likely to purchase if they had a higher income. They already spent more on dairy per week, so they naturally were willing to spend a higher amount on dairy, and had a decreased bias toward local foods. And I'm going to have Caitlin explain that one to me a whole lot more, because what that means is that they weren't selectively searching for local products, which doesn't make sense to me. So it's her job to make it make sense. Welcome to having a master's. So we're going to dig into that one a little bit more. And we're still analyzing this data. So hopefully we'll have more to share out of that survey, and continuing to build on that, looking at the other two states, and then looking at those other dairy products as well. We're also doing a feasibility study for the Little River Dairy Unit, and we'll have that shared soon. So what we're going to do with that is using Little River as a model. What would a feasibility study look like if you were going to do one on your farm? Here's the information you would get. Here are some things to consider, and here are some of the products that might make sense. So we'll have a real feasibility study based on our cows, our milk, our farm that we'll be able to share with you. And maybe we can share with some people at UT too and see what we can do with that information. I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed on that one. We also are going to launch a value-added discussion group, and Shep Stearns is going to lead that. I don't know if everybody's met him yet. Shep, raise your hand, or stand up or do something, make a funny face under your mask. I don't know. So Shep Stearns joined us in May of 21 as our value added specialist. So if you've been getting emails about anything like that from Shep Stearns, this is Shep Stearns. I guess I should introduce Abby also while she's up here. Abby is my master's student who works with precision dairy technology. So got quite the crew with me now. He's going to be proctoring a value added discussion group. So more like a big bulletin board about a bunch of value added questions. I think he's already talked to a couple people in the room about being part of that group. Yes, I am staring at them. They're not paying attention. That's fine. To bounce ideas and questions off of each other. So it would really be more of like a archived learning platform more than anything else. So it's not necessarily that you're only hearing from me or you're only hearing from Shep. You're going to hear from experts in this from across the country. We really want to continue expanding this. And finally, we have our competitive sub-award program. This time, instead of 227,000, we had roughly 3.68 million to award across the 3-state area. So half of our total award for the Dairy Business Innovation Initiative has to go to competitive grants. If I don't spend it on grants, I don't get to use it for the university. So this is a very important part of this program. We received 46 applications across Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina, totaling roughly $8 million in requests. So there was a huge request pool. There were some very competitive applications. And as much as we would have loved to fund all of them, we just simply couldn't. So we funded about half. We had 24 competitive grants that were selected for funding. We have 6 in Tennessee, 7 in Kentucky, and 11 in North Carolina. And that responded to about half the requests from each state. North Carolina just put in more than anybody else. We had 3 that were requests for feasibility studies. Again, what's the best option for my current situation? And then the remaining 21 were some amount of processing equipment purchases, which really makes the DBII unique, is that we are one of the only grants that can fund equipment. Usually that is very difficult to fund. So we're very proud of that particular part. And those were for cheese plants, ice cream, bottling milk, yogurt infrastructure, and even one for soap. So lots of options there. This third round of funding we just received in October. So we have another round of funding. And again, it's roughly 6.67 million, I want to say. So again, 3.068 million going towards sub-awards, going towards those competitive grants. This one's expanding across the entire Southeast. So if it says Southeast on the map, they're eligible for this information. So the first thing we're going to do is define and develop resources for underrepresented owners, species, and products in the value-added industry. So we haven't done a ton so far looking at things like soaps and lotions, which is a potential use of dairy that could potentially be a different revenue stream. So we're going to look at that a little bit. We haven't spent a ton of time and resources on small ruminant. We plan to do a little bit more of that in this next round of funding because there's not a whole lot of information out there. And we also plan to make sure that everyone has access to these programs and really meet people where they are. The second thing we're going to do is doing a developing leadership programming opportunities for value-added dairy business owners and build a leadership base for future generations. So a couple ways we're going to do that is provide scholarships for producers to attend existing leadership conferences. So if anyone on your farm wants to go to Holstein USA to their Young Dairyman Conference, talk to us about it. That's a leadership conference. If anyone wants to go to DFA's Young Cooperator Conference, talk to us. That's a leadership conference. So this one really expands beyond just our value-added guys as an opportunity for everyone. The next thing we're going to do is conduct leadership workshops. We're working with Dr. Carrie Stevens and ALEC, and we're going to have a very targeted program towards dairy producers and helping with leadership challenges, whether that's working with multiple family members, working with difficult employees, working with employees in general, anything beyond the cows, we're going to try to tackle in leadership conferences here. We're also going to provide an undergraduate internship program. That one is specific to the value-added dairy guys. Sorry, can't do that for everybody, but we're going to pair undergraduate students from UT, North Carolina, and UK with existing value-added dairy businesses across the 3 states. So give them some real experience working in a value-added operation and help develop that workforce for future generations. We're also going to conduct a tour of value-added dairy businesses in the Midwest and the Eastern Seaboard. So Midwest, we're planning to time that with World Dairy Expo. Any y'all want to go? Maybe? No? Maybe? Okay, perfect. That's why we timed it with World Dairy Expo. We'll also see some of the value-added operations that exist in Wisconsin and go to the Center of Dairy Research and talk to our partners there. All right. Next year, we're going to go up the Eastern Seaboard and connect with our partners in Vermont, see what dairying looks like up there, and meet with Vermont Agriculture, which is where another grant lives. And maybe in the next one, we'll write in a whole lot of and see what the California industry looks like with our partners over there. Our third objective is defining and optimizing value-added dairy businesses, management, and marketing. So we're going to expand Dairy Gauge beyond just the dairy farm to have something similar for value-added dairy businesses. So something Quicken-esque, but specific for value-added. We're also going to be working with K-Card, which is a compatriot of CPA up in Kentucky. And they're going to be doing in-depth business reviews of our value-added dairy businesses. And I think we have how many budgeted, Hal? 5? Is it 10? Maybe it's 10. It's been a while since I've looked at the grant. It's a few. And then we're going to update Market Ready to include some of the non-food options for dairy, so lotions, soaps, things of that nature. And something I don't have on here that we're also really, really, really excited about is some eye tracking technology. So we put in some equipment as well on this last round of funding. And we actually have glasses that consumers can wear and tell us what they're paying attention to. If I'm looking at a label, what catches my attention? What am I more willing to pay for? What am I going to focus on? So we can have them wear it when they come to your farm store. Where are they spending the most time looking? Is it a good look? Is it a bad look? How do they feel about having agritourism on a farm? Do they feel that is a valuable percentage for what they're wanting to do? I've already talked to a couple of y'all about trying it at your operation. So this isn't complete news to everyone, but we're very, very excited about this eye tracking technology. And we'll be one of the largest in the country, I believe, once we have this grant with eye tracking technology. And thanks to a RIGS proposal that allowed us to expand it a little bit. Some future programming, we are going to have a fertilizer meeting on the 25th of January. Did everybody get my email about the fertilizer meeting on the 25th of January? This is yes, this is no, this is listen, not another email. Perfect. It's free. It's 2 hours. It's from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, so 6 to 8 p.m. Central. And we're really going to be focusing on how do we get through these high fertilizer times. Dr. Sean Hawkins is going to be speaking about using animal waste and really trying to maximize that and get it to go as far as it can. Dr. Lori Duncan is going to be talking about precision application of purchased fertilizer, really putting it where it needs to go. Dr. Neil Esch is going to be discussing soil health and making sure we're putting fertilizer where we actually need it, and we're not putting it somewhere where we can probably get away with waiting for next planting season. And then Dr. Aaron Smith is going to talk about the economic outlook and how long do we think we're going to have to deal with these high fertilizer prices. It's going to be a great meeting. It counts for both Master Beef and Master Dairy credit. So if y'all can be there, definitely come. It'll be a really good cast and you won't have to hear from me at all. The next thing that I have on here is our webinar Wednesday that you might be interested in. And then our 2022 Value Added Dairy Conference is tentatively July 20th to the 21st, and probably in Raleigh, North Carolina. So if you're thinking about going, please come. I think there'll be lots of good dairy products there. And on that note, so Charlie's going to talk to y'all about Dairy Gauge and some of the numbers that they found from there and some different directions we might be going.
Basically, this was started back in 2019 by David Bilderbeck and Chris Boyer, and then as this grant came along, we really ramped it up and made it a really professionally based benchmark program that's an add-in or it's an Excel worksheet that producers fill out. And so I'll just jump straight into it for sake of time. And for last year's study, we actually had 30 farms. I know Liz mentioned 29, but we actually had 30 farms participate from Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina. And so for the folks that are in the room, I know Dr. Harris or Mr. Harrison's already left, but we had quite a bit from Tennessee participate, and we appreciate their participation in this program. And from the Tennessee side and the Tennessee perspective, we actually had 40% of the total production in 2020 in our 2021. All right, so then between those three states, we actually cover 14% of milk production in Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina. Amongst all of those 30 farms, that equates to roughly $51.6 million in net farm income that that we collected farm and financial information on. Is that when you look at the number of cows, the mean or the average is just under 400 cows. And so if you think about in perspective to the Midwest and the Northeast and the Wisconsin area, we're relatively smaller whenever we start comparing our farm size and our economics and our market structure. And so as I go along, I kind of want to highlight certain things after listening to today's conversations, especially in terms of market restructuring and policy implications. Here in the Southeast, so from the CFAP program, we're pretty high there for that given year in 2020, especially during the Corona relief environment that we were in with CFAP, 3 rounds of CFAP and the PPP payments. And so I would expect to see some of that again this coming year in the data from last year for 2021. Probably not that high, but that just goes to show you how much our producers have to rely on government payments whenever the market's kind of not in its. You can see there on a per cow basis, it was just shy or just over $18.50 per cow in terms of the total feed cost. And then of course we have to, labor is always going to be a topic, and it's always going to be something that's we're going to have to be talking about and moving forward in the farm management environment. How do we get labor and recruit labor, and how do we manage that expense is always going to be something that we have to monitor. And so you can see there was just shy of $600 per cow for that year. And then as we get into the variable expenses, you can see the list there. But what I wanted to highlight here was, what we saw our producers doing is whenever they got relief from the government payments and they got a little bit extra money, we saw an increase in repair costs there on a per cow basis, just shy of $300. And so, this goes to show that these producers, when they got the government payments, one, it helped them get through in terms of cash flow, but they also found ways to utilize the extra income on their farm and upgrade or repair whatever was broken on their farm. And so moving forward, I really want to monitor that as we go through the next coming years, as we start dying down our payments. I don't think we'll ever see too many CFAP payments again. So kind of monitoring that will be interesting moving forward. And as you can see, their net farm income for the operations was just under $1,000 per cow for all 30 farms when we started taking the average. But when we start saying, okay, what does that mean on the benchmark side of things? We looked at the financials, but what does that mean? Across the board, everybody was in really good shape from a dairy financial standpoint. I don't have it on here, but we did have a return on equity measurement that we included this past year. And we found some that were a little low and they've actually went out of business. So the ones that were kind of bringing down the average for these benchmarks, actually some of them did go out of business. So what we're left with here is a really good current ratio, a pretty solid debt to asset ratio. We're getting kind of high on the more than 400. But what I want to highlight is that purchase feed cost. If we start thinking about risk management in terms of dairy margin coverage, for instance, we can see that our purchase feed cost gets eaten up pretty quick here in the Southeast. And so when we start thinking of risk management for the future, I would really highlight and emphasize that dairy margin coverage, a dairy RP, stuff of that nature should be utilized by our producers, because as you can see there, our purchase feed cost is pretty high compared to the rest of the nation. That could be a function of our location and a regional impact, but also the fact that we're not as big in the size. If you remember, just under 400 cows, we don't have the advantage of economies of scale. And so if we don't have that advantage, you're going to see our input costs be a little higher compared to those larger farms up in the Midwest and the Northeast. And so moving forward, we've added more benchmarks to the dairy gauge for this coming year. I really am interested in understanding and looking at the feed and input cost analysis with the 2021 data. We had a meeting last March, and at that time, the corn prices were high. There wasn't very good silage put up into the silage pits, and so that was something that farmers and producers were really worried about. And I want to see how they got through 2021 and how they managed that. I think that'll be very telling, especially when we start thinking about input costs and fertilizer costs moving forward into this next year. I'm really interested to see how our producers handle it. I really think we're going to actually have more than 30 next year. And 2022 collecting will be kicking off very soon. So you'll start hearing from David and the rest of the area specialists here in Tennessee. And I want to also say thank you to area specialists around Tennessee that encourage their producers to input their data. And there on the right side, there is a figure that David put, and we've actually put it on social media, and it got a lot of traction, was looking at how much, from a variable cost standpoint, what goes into a gallon of milk. And we've talked about consumers understanding their product, or where does their product come from. Well, let's also say, this is how much this stuff costs in order to make. And keep in mind, we're just talking about variable costs. There's other costs that we could sprinkle in. And so the next time you're at the grocery store and you see the price of 1 gallon, think about it from a dairy producer's perspective. We're just shy of $2 a gallon in terms of just costs. So that's not even profit. And so earlier there was a lot of talk about, trying to increase price of milk, and from a profit function standpoint, increased price definitely does help the bottom line. There's no doubt about it. But if you can manage your cost and understand how your costs are impacting your bottom line, that's also very important. And so as we get into a low margin environment right now, especially with the way feed costs are looking and input costs, managing your cost from the production standpoint is just as powerful than also having an increased price. But so then the other flip side of that is moving forward, we wanted to look at consumer preferences, and Liz did a good job of understanding or highlighting how we're going to try to attack understanding consumer preferences for milk products and dairy products. Because if we think about it, if you want to increase price, and we think about milk as something that's in the back of a grocery store that doesn't really fluctuate in price, well, we got to find new demand. If we find new demand, that helps increase the value of the product, which then increases price. And so if we can help producers look at consumer preferences on one side that increases price, then we're helping producers manage their costs. Then we're actually helping in two different ways to help your bottom line. And that's what we want to do for y'all that are in the crowd. And again, we thank the people that have really helped us and also submitted their data. Moving forward, it was already highlighted this year, we're going to have the Farm Bill, in the discussions and what's going to happen moving forward. I think as we continue to monitor these farms over time, that's going to position us to also be, something that we can take to the table and say, hey, we've been monitoring farms throughout the time, and we've got granular data, and we can look at and say, what are your policy recommendations, and we can look at some implications for our producers here in the Southeast. And so that, I think that's something moving forward that'd be very beneficial. We want to develop a value-added dairy gauge. And then we're also, she mentioned it, getting the eye tracking. And as she was saying, I went and grabbed 2 slides real quick to kind of show y'all real quick. She mentioned the glasses. We can use those glasses to take in stores and do experiments. And we also have stationary cameras. And this is what it looks like. As people look at things, we can see where they look. We can see how long they look, the heat maps. And so imagine having a lab, or imagine having a logo or a brand or a packaging or a product design or a product placement of a dairy product, and we can look at and see how our consumers are actually going to take on and absorb that information, and how does it impact their decision. We know that there's a willingness to pay and a stated preference and a reveal preference, but we want to look at in the middle and help our producers here in Tennessee and in the Southeast. And so between the eye tracking lab, the Little River facility that Dr. Shin did a good job of highlighting, I think in the end, all this accumulates is where we can develop a Tennessee baseline here. I say Tennessee, but it also could be the Southeast. And if we start using a baseline that we can utilize for our producers, then we can really look at implications of what does a market restructure look like? What is the recommended policy that at that time, whenever we're in the future and there's certain policy recommendations, how does that affect our producers? And if we look at it from a holistic perspective for our producers here in the Southeast, I think it's going to be pretty monumental, especially if we can start cross-pollinating this program into different sectors of agriculture like beef or row crops. Then we really can develop a baseline, and Dairy Gauge would have been the Dairy Gauge, and the Dairy Gauge producers that have given us data will be the starting point as we evolve moving forward. I went kind of fast just for sake of time because I know we're going to get out of here, but I want to at least have some acknowledgments. Thank you to the participating producers. Without your time and information, Dairy Gauge would not be where it's at. And then also want to shout out our partners, the Kentucky Farm Business Management Program, Kentucky Dairy Development Council, North Carolina State Extension, and the University of Kentucky. If there's any questions, I'll take them. But this is my information. If you're on Twitter, that's my Twitter handle. It's always easiest to get a hold of me, calling that number, and I'll get back with you as fast as I can.